Let's move on. Do you want to go back to your topic?
Let's go ahead and keep doing some calls here. We've got
Okay, let's talk to Chris.
got a
I
Chris.
ask about my father. Hello?
Chris,
Hello.
you're on. Ask your about your father.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I had a question about my father died. Actually, it was about 4 weeks ago. And I mean, what do we do to deal with something like that? You know, it's not. I mean, you know, this is one of the areas where I think religion does give people something of value to make them feel better. And yet, if you don't believe in God, what do you have?
Yeah, well, I guess I lost my father about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my dealing with that is fairly recent. And I can tell you that, you know, I don't see the grieving process as being that much different from, you know, between religious and non-religious people. You know, it really is just something you have to work through. And I don't know, I would hesitate to give anybody advice on how to get through that process. One thing that I know is that from my perspective, religion did not help my stepmother deal with the loss of my father. And in many ways it insulated her from the fact that he was dying and prevented her from actually preparing for that. So I think it's not universally good. Now, she did have some, you know, a support structure and everything after he was gone and everything. But, you know, people are human, even people in a church. And at some point, they get tired of dealing with the weepy widow, you know, who needs somebody to prop her up every day. So my suggestion is that if you're really struggling with the grief, see a counselor. And that's the same advice I would give to someone who's religious. So,
For me, I've dealt with a few losses. You know, I'm not that old, so my grandparents just went a number of years ago. My last surviving grandmother died this year, and so did one of my cats. And so did George Carlin, who I admired very much. And I wish that I did have this belief that a part of their personality continued and still had thoughts and feelings, and that death wasn't real. But wishing for something doesn't make it true. For me, what I find helps somewhat is the notion that when somebody is gone, that person may be gone, but they're part of an unbroken chain of people who influence each other's lives. And I know that my grandmother influenced my life greatly, and you know, I continue to feel that influence to this day. And similarly, when our cat died, I told Ben that you know, the cat lived a good life, and she you know, that we would always have memories of her, and just that mental process is a way that that her life had meaning. So that's kind of my take on it.
Well, certainly I agree. Although I've got to say, you know, I've lost all four of my grandparents.
Yeah.
It is not the same.
I know.
It's definitely something. You know, I think it's big. I think, you know, and not big. I mean, it's big when you have a child, you know, of course, too. And I found out when I went up to my dad's funeral too, that a few months ago, one of my favorite teachers had died, and believe me, that's a big one too. But
Yeah.
is it all right too if I recommend a group? I mean, there are a lot of groups out there for dealing with them. But I went to one last Sunday, for example, and all they wanted to do was talk about Jesus and how we are a sinner. But there are some groups out there that you can go to that are not religious based, but I don't know how many of them there are, because it seemed like a lot of them were religious based. But I did manage to go to one last Monday. They were wonderful people, and you know, I think some religious people did come there, but you know, it wasn't something that was required.
yeah. In fact, I think that, you know, depending on what your loved one died from, there are often support groups that are specifically for people who've lost someone to that disease. I know my father had multiple myeloma, And there are all kinds of support groups online and usually in most major cities for stuff like that. And so, I think that, if you've found a group locally that's reasonably, comfortable for you to interact with, I think that's a very good thing to do.
Is it all right if I mention them on here? I just want, it would kind of be an advertisement, but I highly recommend them.
Sure, I think
Yeah,
that's
I think
okay. I mean,
that's
they're
fine.
not getting money anyway, right?
It's just a nonprofit. The group is called For the Love of Christy. It was founded by some parents who lost their daughter to a drunk driver, and they have a lot of programs, and they have programs for kids who lose parents, and programs for teenagers, and they have a lot of different. I went over there last Monday, and there were about 40 people there, and then we break off into smaller groups and just talk about things. And I mean, obviously, the only qualification is that you have to have had somebody who died recently. Although I don't know what their definition of recent is. So, in my case,
I can't imagine them wanting to turn a lot of people away. So
Yeah.
They were wonderful people, and if you just go to, it's For the Love of Christy. It's over on Hancock. It's not very easy to find in the dark, but and they do expect you to call first before you instead of just showing up for a meeting. But definitely, that's a wonderful group of people to deal with.
Well, I mean, I support the notion of people joining groups because, I mean, one of the ways people deal with things in general is by being social about it and reaching out to other people who are still alive. So, yeah, do that.
I think this is something, too, that where maybe atheist groups or secular groups could get out there and try to provide more things like this, because it often does happen that suddenly when there's a death in the family or something, somebody who's never been to church in years suddenly starts going to church again or something like that. Because people have it's a very intense emotional event in someone's life.
Right. Unfortunately, religions are specifically geared up to take advantage of people who are at vulnerable points in their life. I mean, it's not only the death of somebody. It's they specifically go after people who are poor or in desperate need or drug users or in prison, and they say, "Hey, you have terrible problems in your life," like lots of people do at many different points. Here's your magic solution.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I think it's kind of shameful myself.
You got to remember too, people who are predatory can smell out people like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it is, but they just have that's just the word, because they just seem to know, hey, he's an easy target, we'll go after him. I mean, I don't know if smell's the right word to use, but that seems to be
good as any.
They just have a radar for the right people, and I think in the past, at points in my life, I actually had lots of people like that approaching me, and they just come out, and then after, I remember I was out at work, and then after 2 or 3 minutes, a guy said, "Oh, by the way, how's your face?" It's just suddenly out of nowhere, and it's amazing how these things happen. But certainly it's something you have to deal with now and then, right? Mm-hmm. But it was one of those things too. Having been raised in a Catholic family, I just went through the motions and went back and played Catholic again at the funeral and all that stuff. I mean, you kind of have to do that. I mean, it's your dad. Just go through the motions even though you're faking it.
Yeah, I actually didn't do that at my father's funeral.
Yeah.
And we had, it was in a church, the church that he attended, and there were lots of people there who were, obviously believers, his pastor and everybody. Some people made some, eulogies that involved religion. There were like several people that eulogized him up there. So they included, his faith and everything. And that's fine. I mean, it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. He was at one point, before he got very ill, he was studying to be a minister. So, and then my brother actually did, the main part of the eulogy, even though my brother's not particularly religious. But, I think overall it wasn't something I felt uncomfortable attending. And I didn't have to pretend that I was there as a religious person.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I'm real sorry for your loss, and if you feel the need to reach out and be social, then feel free to join us for dinner sometime.
Yeah.
Well, I may do that. I've certainly found some good groups out there, and it's I don't know how many secular groups there are like this, though. I have a feeling there aren't too many. Just we just happen to live in a city where people like to form groups, and there are I would say this is a pretty non-religious city, although certainly Texas.
For Texas, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Bye.
All right, thanks for
thanks.
calling. And if you are local and would like to join us for dinner in a little under an hour now, the show's going to be ending in 23 minutes. And at 6:30, you can join us at Threadgill's on 301 West Riverside Drive. Great restaurant. Come on over.